The member from Itasca, Representative Layman.
On here, so he's got 2 bills we're going to take out? Yeah, correct. Really?
It doesn't reflect
Those 2 no, these 2 yes? Oh, no.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm moving to my desk for the last time today. I thought maybe I was going to escape this retirement speech because, as you know, most retirement speeches were done in May during the regular session, and I announced my retirement in early June. That was 7 months ago, and this has been a very long goodbye because since that time we've had 7 special sessions. So, but I'm really thankful for this opportunity, Madam Speaker, so thank you for that. So I didn't get much sleep last night because I was thinking about this retirement speech and my last day in this awesome place. And it's just kind of an emotional time when you think about it, even though it's been a short time for me. And so I was thinking about some of the retirement speeches that I heard from my colleagues. And I was thinking about Dan Fabian. Dan, if you're out there listening, because Dan, he gave a very heartfelt talk, and he reminded us again that he has a 700-mile round-trip commute to St. Paul. Can you imagine trying to recruit a representative and convince him that it's no big deal to drive 350 miles to work? But the thing that struck me about Dan is he said that until he served as a legislator, he had never been to this building. He had never been to the Capitol. And so I started thinking about when I first came to the Capitol, and like many of you and many of our school children today, it was a 5th grade trip. Because I went to Earl Brown Elementary in Brooklyn Center, and our 5th grade trip was to come to the Capitol. I remember it well. I remember walking through the governor's office and totally expecting to see the governor at his desk. Didn't see him. But then I started thinking about, in addition to the Capitol, the next year was our 6th grade trip. And that was a big deal because that was an overnighter. And I don't remember everything we did, but I do know we went to the Iron Range. We went to the Mesaba Iron Range. And I remember that because I brought back a big chunk of red iron ore, and I kept that for years and years and years. And so I'm thinking now, back in 5th and 6th grade, with my trip to the Capitol, my trip to the Iron Range, never would have believed that decades later I would be here representing communities on the Iron Range. You never know, as a 5th grader and a 6th grader, what the possibilities are. So I wanted to tell a couple of stories that talk about my, what I think I brought to the Capitol. The first kind of viewpoint, perspective that I brought was that of an outsider. And I'm thinking of my first kind of business that I conducted here. And I was president of the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce. This was the mid-1990s. And I was working with the president of the Hibbing Chamber of Commerce because our legislators were working on legislation to create a tax sharing plan across the Iron Range. It was modeled after the Metropolitan Fiscal Disparities Plan. We called it sharing the wealth. But it's now known as Iron Range Fiscal Disparities. Well, the Hibbing Chamber president and I were very much opposed to the Fiscal Disparities Plan. And so this was before the days of email, before the days of the internet, mid-1990s. And so we were faxing. We faxed all the legislators, not just our legislators, we faxed all the legislators. We called the legislators. I got a response from one, Minority Leader Steve Swigum. And Steve Swigum was ready and willing to take up our challenge. He said, send me the language. I sent him the language. He was minority leader. He was going to offer an amendment on the floor to the tax bill to eliminate Iron Range fiscal disparities. Well, I came down to St. Paul hopeful with the former mayor. We sat up here in the balcony fully expecting that Minority Leader Steve Swigum was going to save the day. And the tax bill came up, Minority Leader Swiggum went to the microphone, offered our amendment, and was immediately shot down by the Iron Range delegation members who were in the majority. And one after another let Steve Swiggum know that he was barking up the wrong tree. Finally, the last person to speak was Representative Tom Rukavina, who said, "Steve Swiggum, you're just an Iron Range wannabe." If you remember Representative Rukavina. So Steve Swiggum sat down, and Irv Anderson, I was waiting for the vote. I thought we were going to count the vote and thought we had a chance. And Speaker of the House, Irv Anderson, called for a voice vote, and it was all over, just like that. 5 minutes at the most. I learned my lesson then. It's tough to be an outsider. And I take that with me now when I work with my constituents. They don't always understand how things work around here, and it's our job to help them shepherd their problems, their needs, their issues through. It's tough to be an outsider. Okay, that was mid-1990s. Now let's flash forward a little more than 10 years later. I'm Commissioner of Iron Range Resources and Rehabilitation. I'm in Governor Palenti's cabinet. I've completed my first 4-year term. It hasn't been easy. I was, number one, the first female commissioner in the 75-year history of the state agency. I was a Cohasset resident, which some people didn't consider to be a true Iron Ranger. And I was a Republican. And I was working with an all-DFL board. Governor Palenti was working to work our way through a $4 billion deficit. Some of you might remember that. And as a part of his strategy to work through that deficit, he was going through an on-allotment process. And one of his on-allotments was with the sacred Douglas J. Johnson Trust Fund. And so when my confirmation came up the second time around for Governor Palenti's second term, the Iron Range senators decided that this was their opportunity for payback. And I soon learned that I was not to be confirmed. And I will spare you the backroom discussions and all that happened, but I survived. And in fact, it was Senator Tomassoni who stood on the Senate floor and recommended my confirmation when all was said and done. So that perspective was that of the executive branch, where I came away with an understanding that as an executive branch member, it's not always easy working with the legislature. And it's something to figure out. So let's flash forward another 10 years. Now I've started my own consulting business. I'm sharing my experiences with college students. I'm an adjunct faculty member for the College of St. Scholastica. And Kurt Dout and Ben Golnick approached me and think it's a good idea for me to come to St. Paul and join their team. Well, I think that's an outlandish idea. I'm 65 years old, and my husband's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. But you know what? I still have the passion. I still have the passion for this place, and I still have friends in this place. And more importantly, there's work to be done. There's things that I wanted to do. And so I said yes. My family, I thought I would talk to my family, and they would certainly convince me not to do it. My family was my biggest supporters. They convinced me to go ahead and do it. So I came down to St. Paul, not knowing what to expect, and boy, I sure was not disappointed. What I found here was a caucus of friends, a family, made up of farmers, insurance salesmen, realtors, people in the hospitality industry, people from all walks of life that were here for one reason, and that was to serve their constituents and to serve Minnesota. People who would stop and say a prayer for a member of the caucus if they needed it. This is truly a family. Once I took the oath of office, Karen Rudine, Tom Erickson, Grant Erickson, all former staffers who have gone on to other great careers, made me look like I knew what I was doing. In my second term as a minority leader, a minority member, I've been focused on helping my constituents through these tumultuous times. And my successes have been made possible by my incredible partner, my legislative assistant, Betsy Ritzer, my talented media support, David Anderson, and our constituent services superstar, Mark Lollybird. I'm most pleased with the work, as I said, that I've done for my constituents, the folks that really feel like they're on the outside and have issues. And boy, this year, didn't we do our work for constituents. But I'm also pleased with some big items, things that I wanted to do that, with the help of all of you and the help of our staff, I was able to do. One thing was, we had an issue in our county with Blandin Paper Company, was in court with our counties, and they were disputing the property tax valuation. And our counties, Itasca County, was looking at a back payment of over $10 million, which would fall on our taxpayers. It was an issue that just wasn't being resolved. It just kept going through the courts. And I went to Chair Davids, and I went to Steve Rubus, and I had been chief author of a bill on the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act. We used that Incentive Act as the basis for an out-of-court settlement. And you remember, I don't know if you remember this, you have to remember Chair Davids and Steve Rubus, they called all the counties, hosted a meeting here at the Capitol of all the counties, Blandin Paper Companies, spent the day, worked it out. This was a big deal. This was a big deal for my constituents in my counties. Second item was IRRB reform. There were so many items that I had wanted to work on as commissioner, and I worked, and I tried, and I failed. As a legislator, I had an opportunity. I was now colleague with the very representatives who had served on my board. We were now colleagues together. And so this was during Governor Dayton's time, and I knew that any reform bill I had would need to be signed by the governor. I didn't want to waste my time. I didn't want to waste your time. So I made an appointment with Governor Dayton, went to his office, sat down with him, and I said, I want to work on IRRB reform. And here's my thoughts. And I want to know what you'll sign and what you'll approve. And he was very straightforward to me. He said, I'll approve whatever Senator Bach and Thomasoni approve. And so that was my marching orders. Negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. Work with the other side. We did it. We came with a compromise. We came with a reform bill. We got it through Pat Garofalo's committee. Pat was wonderful and supportive. And it became Article 4 of the Economic Development and Energy Omnibus Bill. It was a big section of that omnibus bill that year. And then I got to work on broadband. I'd been, as a consultant, been working on broadband for decades, and I came down here and was able to be chief author, and then later co-author with Representative Eklund on broadband. We made some real headway. Kind of picked up the ball from Dave Baker, who helped me. He had been the champion of broadband when I came down, so thank you, Dave, for that. And then finally, I would just like to say that, I've talked a lot about bipartisan work, and that's what I think I've enjoyed the most. I'm really impressed by what I see in Congress with the Problem Solvers Caucus. I've talked to several people about that. We haven't gotten there yet, but I'm hoping that someday the state legislature has a Problem Solvers Caucus, so that when we have those tough issues that we just can't crack, we can come together in a bipartisan fashion and maybe develop some solutions. I know one of my favorite experiences was last year, 17 days on the Capital Investment Tour Bus. those are hard days. Mary Murphy was chair. She's a driver. She's a hard driver. You think that, well, Mary, she's a little older. She's going to take it easy. No. We left at 7 in the morning. We'd pull into the hotel at 8, 9 o'clock at night. But you know what? We sat on the back of the bus, and it was DFLers and Republican legislators, DFLers and Republican staff people. We got to know each other. We got to trust each other. And when all was said and done at the end of this year, we had a pretty significant bonding bill that I could feel good about coming back to my community. So in some closing comments, I feel like even though I've just been here for 2 terms, I want to give some words of advice to the incoming freshmen who may be listening in. And I want to go back to when I was in orientation, and Ron Krisha was kind of our little leader there, and I think he was paraphrasing author and poet Maya Angelou. He was telling us how to treat each other, and he was telling us that it's all about relationships down here. It's not just relationships with other legislators, but it's relationships with staff, it's relationships with lobbyists. And what he said was, and I will quote what Maya Angelou has said, and I've heard it so many times since then, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. That really stuck with me. I think that is so incredibly important. And to that beautiful thought, I'd like to add my own advice, something that I have printed on below my signature line in all my correspondence, just the words, above all else, be kind. I want to thank my husband, Bill, who supported me in all these ventures while enduring a degenerative brain disease. Now it's my opportunity to support him. I want to thank my sons, Nate and Nick, and their families who encouraged me to run and to run again. I want to thank my California liberal sister, Mary, who was the first to write that $1,000 check and then write letters to all our family and friends and ask them to do the same thing when I first ran. She was my confidant and my gentle critic through the entire 2 terms. I want to thank my senator, Justin Eichhorn, who teamed up with me and ran with me as a team member, served with me as a team member, and made it happen for our constituents. I want to thank Representative-elect Spencer Igo, who will be sworn into office in a few weeks to succeed me, a young man who honestly believes that our best days are ahead of us. And obviously, I want to thank all the folks back at home who voted for me, who prayed for me, who trusted me to be their voice here at the Capitol, which I consider to be such an honor. And finally, I want to thank all of you, those of you who are still listening on Zoom. And I'm so happy that there's some faces here on the floor that I can see. I want to thank each one of you for your friendship, for your commitment to service. Here's to a new year, a post-pandemic world where we will appreciate each other more than ever and look forward to the day when this beautiful building, the People's House, is once again open to the public. Thank you.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Dehn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. It's a weird time. I mean, it's December. I knew back in August that this was going to be my last term, and yet I'm here today. Well, I've got a lot of things I want to get to, but first off, I want to make sure that I say those thank yous to all those people that have been with me on this journey. To the staff in the House of Representatives, you're all amazing, and the people of the state of Minnesota should be very proud of the people who assist all of us in doing our jobs. And that's both nonpartisan and partisan staff. Incredible amount of people work for you, the people of Minnesota, and work for us as representatives here at the Capitol to be able to do what we do for the people of Minnesota. To the front desk and to the clerk's office, you guys are amazing. I can't believe the kind of stuff that we put all of you through. The fact that you respond speaks incredible amount to your dedication. To Bob Meyerson, the Sergeant of Arms, someone who I think I developed a pretty great relationship with over these few years. Kind of unlikely relationship, but I think that that's okay. I think that that's what this place is about. You develop relationships with people that you normally wouldn't have ever done that out in your daily life and out in public. And you've dealt with some really difficult and contentious times here in the legislature these past few years. And I want to let you know that I've never heard a member say a negative word about you and the job you've done. And I think that speaks to a lot, because members can be pretty critical of people. To Gavin, staff in the GOP caucus, I think, I don't see you in the room, but he was an incredible asset. One of those people that I worked with across the aisle and developed a great relationship. And those relationships allowed us to do our jobs, first working with him on capital investment. Representative Layman spoke of the back of the bus, which was an incredible experience. And of course, the staff on the DFL side, Jenny Nash, the work she has done to assist chairs, not only chairs of the DFL party, but chairs in the Republican Party, in making sure that the Capital Investment Committee is able to do the work that it was charged with. To all my legislative assistants over the years, Lynn, Owen, Martha, Andrew, Yingya, thank you for helping me do the job that I've been doing. And of course, I can't leave out my legislative assistant committee administrator, Amanda Rudolph. We're amazing to work with. You're one of those people who quickly learned what were not my strengths, and you stepped in and you filled those areas to do what you could to make sure that I can do the job that I've done. Again, amazing person. I hope that our friendship continues after I leave office. It's one of the things, you really develop some deep relationships. And I think sometimes when you leave here, those relationships change. But they should only change. They shouldn't go away, because that's an important thing. I also want to take a moment to thank Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison for being an incredible mentor over all these years. It's been an honor to serve in the seat in the district that you once represented. I hope that you continue to do great things for the people of Minnesota. To my colleagues who I sat next to during my first term, right down there in that row of 4 seats, Joe Radidovich, I hope that your life continues to unfold in a way that brings you all the happiness you deserve. I wasn't excited about the job you took as a campaign manager of a fellow candidate when I ran for mayor, but congratulations, you guys won, and that's the important thing, is that we all get back together and we do the work. Karen Clark, you sat to the left of me, and you meant so much as a mentor in helping me to stay grounded in doing the work of representing my constituents. And Frank Hornstein, not only have you been a great mentor, you've been a great partner on many issues, but more importantly, a true friend. And I hope that that friendship continues for quite some time. To my colleagues across the aisle, I have many wonderful relationships with so many of you, but first I want to call out the guy I roomed with during my freshman orientation, Nick Zerwas. Probably two very unlikely members, myself, and Nick, to forge a friendship. And I'm really grateful that I was in the room, hotel room, the conference room with him, because I don't think we would have had the friendship we had if we didn't have those late night conversations of just us two and learning who we are and why we got where we got. Thank you for the discourse, at times on different sides of issues, and at other times, of course, we're on the same side of the issues and the legislation, and that's something that I hope the public understands, that while the media presents us as always being against each other, we come together so much more than you can imagine. To Chair Davids, thank you for the experience of getting to know you as a person. I guess that's what happens when you're wrestlers. You seek each other out and you find each other because it's an unusual sport. We know of all the wrestlers in politics. It prepares you in an odd way for politics. Because in wrestling, you compete as an individual, but you also compete as a team. And that's a critical aspect to understand, that both those things are important at the same time. To Representative Erdahl, who will be the last member of the Dehn caucus. There was a time where there were three of us Deans, me, Matt Dehn, and Dean Erdahl. We call ourselves the Dehn caucus. And your perspective on capital investment and being in the back of the bus and the conversations that took place over all those years, it's just an incredible experience. And to one of my biggest foils in the legislature the past few years, Representative Jim Nash. We forged an unlikely working relationship, both in the Elections Committee and outside of the Elections Committee. And we should take some pride in working together along with the Senate and the Secretary of State, Steve Simon, to make sure that during these difficult times, we're able to get the resources needed to our county election officers and to the voters of Minnesota to have a safe election. To my longtime podmate, Leon Lilly, you lifted me when we were in the minority and life was frustrating, but having been through it, you knew that there was light at the end of the tunnel, and you always had a way of sort of looking at the good and the fun side of things, even when you're in the minority. And to all the people that helped me out through my campaigns, whether you're workers, whether you're contributors, I want to say a huge thank you. And here's where it gets a little bit tough. To Joan, our partnership didn't survive my time in office. But it was your support that allowed me to make my way into the legislature. To my son, I couldn't be more proud to be your father. You've turned into an amazing individual. And to my mom, who passed away a few years ago, actually when I was sitting right down there, when we were trying to make a statement about gun violence, she passed away that night. Thank you for always believing in me, even when you didn't know what the hell I was doing. And lastly, some parting words to the people who serve in this legislature. I'm worried about this body and how it's become, during my time, my short time serving, it's become more polarized, more vitriolic in how we speak, in our rhetoric. It concerns me. I know that we can work together when we agree on issues, But I've also seen us work together when we disagree on things. And that's the true test of our ability to actually represent the people of the state of Minnesota in doing what we do. It seems that there's been a political divide out in our communities. And it's gotten more severe this past election. And I think we're responsible for it. Yep, I said it. I think we are the ones responsible for it. Some of us might say that, well, we're just responding to our base. That's sort of where they're at, and we need to do that. And I think there's a little bit of that. But I also think we create the environment that our base sort of responds to. And that's a critical piece that it's our personal values and our community's personal values, but how we talk about our people in elections and the respective parties while we campaign, I think has a huge negative impact on how Republicans talk about Democrats and how Democrats talk about Republicans. And I think we as candidates, as members, can do an important part of breaking down and reuniting us and our democracy. I'm worried about it. We're the ones that set the groundwork for the politics, and it would be great if we could change that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not naive enough to think that elections are important. They are important. But this is the body that goes back and forth every 3-4 terms. We know that Minnesota at best is a 46% state, which means that we all have to figure out how to work together. And I've witnessed far too many times in this body that the decisions we make regarding policy seem to be based more on the impact of the election than about what's doing right for the people of Minnesota. A few things that I'd like to see you all do after I leave here. One, figure out a way to get money out of politics. That connects back to what I just said about the decisions that we make here. We as candidates, you all have been engaged with it. We don't really control our messaging when we campaign to the voters. And that's not going to change unless we change the way in which we fund our campaigns. Other countries give candidates the money. They don't ask people for money. They don't have lobbyists giving them money. We have a really, really kind of skewed system that creates opportunities, not for us to sort of be bought, but for us to sort of say, how is this going to affect us? How is this going to affect our ability to get the resources we need to win elections? That's all critical stuff, and we can change that. I don't expect it to change overnight. Citizens United changed that. I spent many years trying to change it at the national level with other state legislators throughout the country, but we have a long ways to go on that issue. Restore the vote. That's something that over the past decade has went from being seen as, oh, Democrats support that, to something that's truly bipartisan. Remember, in Minnesota, we don't incarcerate a great number of people compared to other states. But we do put a great number of those individuals on probation, which means they're out in the public, which means we expect them to work, which means we expect them to be good citizens, we expect them to pay taxes, but we say, well, but you can't vote when it comes to election time. That's something we have the power to change. And I know I've heard all the conversations, well, there's so much voter fraud. I just want to see the evidence. I mean, we've had a few incidences of a voter voting when they shouldn't have voted. Sometimes intentionally, many times not intentionally. making it so 45,000 people can't vote in the state of Minnesota doesn't help the state, and it doesn't help them with individuals, as individuals. We know that voting is pro-civic behavior for those individuals who have done something wrong in our criminal justice system. That's the type of activities that make them less likely to reoffend in the future. And after all, if our job is public safety, we should be doing things to actually prevent the incidences of individuals committing offenses, rather than saying, well, they'll commit the offenses and then we'll just punish them. That doesn't bring public safety. Public safety really occurs when people don't commit offenses. So hopefully people will continue to focus on that. We need to recognize that poverty is the cause of many things that we deal with here at the Capitol. It's not people that make bad decisions. It's not people that aren't bright. It's not bad people. It's poverty. And we spend a lot of time trying to address the difficulties of the lives of people that are in poverty, and yet we don't address the issues around poverty. We need to start looking at that and how we can change that. You know, the argument generally is, well, we don't have the resources. Well, you know, I stood over there, I think it might have been April or May, when we were finding close to $400 million here, $200 million there to help hospitals, to help businesses, to help other folks, because we knew that was important for them to be able to do what they needed to do for us as far as hospital, for small businesses who didn't cause this pandemic. And by the way, Governor Walz didn't cause this pandemic. But we found the resources. I think we can find the resources for the people that struggle. And if we can just help them a little bit, I think we can set many of them on the course in their lives to be what I like to call individuals who are paying taxes instead of just individuals that are receiving benefits. Lastly, I'll leave you with this. You all have a huge responsibility in representing your constituents and the people of Minnesota. It's my opinion that many of you are here for the right reasons to serve those constituents, and you do it well. Others of you seem to be in it for just yourself. Some of you have further ambitions, and that's okay to have a further ambitions. But while you're in the legislature, focus on the work in front of you. The work that you've been elected to do for your constituents and for the people of Minnesota. You can do them both. But please, don't let your own ambitions get the best of you. And as I say to a lot of people, don't believe the hype. You have a job to do here. The people have entrusted you to do that job. You need to do it, no matter what your ambitions are. So many people ask me what it's like to do my job, and do I enjoy it? I've come up with a response that's kind of odd, and I think you need to think about it a little bit before it sort of sinks in. I say that this is the best job I've ever hated, and the worst job that I've ever loved. And it's been a true honor to serve in this body, and I will miss it. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members.
The member from Anoka, Representative Runbeck.
I didn't know I was one of the three, but that's perfectly fine. So, thank you, Madam Speaker. So I'm going to start and just begin right away and thank constituents. Many, many great people. A lot of folks just have made that experience of serving very rich. We've done a lot of battles together. Some we've won, probably many we've lost. But so many people inspired and taught and became friends with me. So it's been fantastic. Thank you also to staff. A lot of professionals here who have kept me out of trouble. David Anderson, thank you so much. Thanks to my husband Rich and our daughter Britta. Serving is a sacrifice. They would tell you that for sure. But thankfully Rich demanded that I be done. Let's retire, let's quit. And our daughter went on to become quite a liberal. So she learned from mom. And she's a great gal. We love her. And thank you to colleagues here. I mean, one of the great things is being in this environment where people are so inspiring and so hardworking and energetic. They love ideas. They love, getting deep into the policy and so on. And so that's been just an incredible thing. I think, it's a great place to be. So for me, it's been 22 years in office. Pretty hard to believe, but it's been really an honor and really a privilege to serve. I've served 14 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate, and that was back in the 90s. I served in the Senate. Most of you probably don't know how often I stood on the steps as a senator, the steps of the Capitol, and ranting about give the money back, give the money back. Those were the days when it was all about taxes and spending, real bread and butter stuff. That was a great deal of fun. People ask, did I like the Senate or the House better? I mean, frankly, the Senate, you can pick any issue you want and you can run with it. It's great. The House is way more competitive, and you got people crawling all over that want their 2 cents in. So, but 2020 has been by far the most difficult year, a real nasty election, I would say, a difficult, contentious election, and then an unprecedented shutdown. And frankly, I believe a shutdown that's not justified by the data, not justified by the science, doing incredible, incredible harm. And we will look back in shame, I believe, on what we have done to Minnesotans, to their kids, to their families, and their business. Anyway, but the times have changed a great deal since the 90s. And Republicans and Democrats in the House actually, got along. It was a lot of cordiality, and maybe because I was in the Senate, but there was a lot of cordiality, and there were people who rose above the fray and just made everything work, made the institution better. And I can think back, maybe some people remember Senator Jean Merriam, Senator Tom Neville, and let's see, in the House, Representative Dave Bishop, incredible people. I'm going to even say Representative Phil Krinke, Representative Tom Rukavina. I mean, those are folks who wrangled, but were able to, enjoy and make it kind of fun, something everyone enjoyed and got involved in. Then Republicans started winning majorities, and I think maybe some of the bipartisanship vanished because elections have been tough. They've been nasty. And so it's not as easy to smile and say, howdy, after you've been kind of beat up a lot. But summing up 22 years is pretty daunting. I come back, though, to my ground zero, where I really started and what I care about. And the taxpayer, the individual taxpayer, the guy or gal that we expect to be there with the deep pockets to pay for all the things and all the great ideas and all the wish lists, and it should be this, it should be that. We expect the taxpayer to be there. And I don't know that that's an assumption that we should be taking. But they are the glue, and that includes the small business people, the entrepreneurs, the startups, etc. I'm a former small business owner myself, so I really get what they do. Without anybody pushing them, they create new jobs, go to work, pay the bills, sacrifice to put their kids through college. They're just there. They support our neighborhood functions, civic organizations, schools, etc. So they are the glue to a thriving Minnesota. And we dare not take them for granted. We're looking ahead at the next biennium, and there's a big agenda. We've actually had a preview of it 2 years ago when the Democrats' legislative agenda was a flood of legislative proposals that would have transformed Minnesota. So we know what's coming, I think. I think we've had a preview of it. But the big question, all right, is who is going to pay for it? That should always be the question when we hear about these wonderful ideas. Who's going to pay for it? Where's the money coming from? And I look at the Green New Deals, 100% renewable energy. That's a great idea, but that's going to drive homeowner fuel bills up by 30 to 50%. Who is going to pay to make St. Paul and Minneapolis safe and livable again after 2 mayors and a governor refused to enforce the law and quell the violence? Now violence is pretty much of an everyday thing in these 2 cities. Will they recover, or are they on their way to becoming the next Detroits? Who's going to pay for free college for all? Gee, that's a great idea too. But when you've already sacrificed to pay for your own kids to go to school, nobody thinks that's fair. Nobody thinks that's right. It's not efficient. Who's going to pay for a school curricula based on the 1619 project when it produces kids who despise our country and furthermore believe in socialism? Who's going to pay for policies that require equity as their chief measure of success? Democrats want to regulate speech and make certain speech unlawful. Who's going to pay for a system of policing speech and enforcing those laws? Our free speech is definitely under assault. Democrats are working hard to even normalize things that most people would find very objectionable. One example, people who questioned drag queens reading to 5-year-olds in a public library. If you objected, you were the one that was shouted down and made to feel out of step. What's happening to our free speech and our constitutional rights? So this is a culture war, and I just have to urge my colleagues, those on the left and those on the right who have a belief in our institutions and know that it is those institutions that have made our state and our nation strong. There is nothing good about trying to tear down those institutions and replace them. And so we must fight every day to keep those prominent and in place. But culture war, like we're talking about, we will dearly pay for. And I would just urge you to look at San Francisco and what's happened to 2 of its great companies who've thrown in the towel and moved to Texas. That exodus could happen in Minnesota. There's an exodus now that people are talking about out of St. Paul and Minneapolis. You just have to have read yesterday's St. Paul Pioneer Press, a great letter to the editor from a young woman who said, the streets are not safe for kids. They can't be on their bikes. They can't go to the parks. People don't want to sit on their steps or sit even in their backyards because of the drug deals. It's not very far from this very spot. So some of the ideas that sounded very progressive seem to be actually turning things around, turning things backwards for our beautiful city. I grew up in Minneapolis. But it's being destroyed, people. At any rate, I could go on, I think, but a couple of things I just wanted to also mention is that we had a bill, I believe it passed in the House. I don't think it got any further, but it was a bill that said that the public health risk to our state is racism. And I would just say that we are weaponizing racism, and in such a way that it is hurting the very people that we want to see thrive in our community. When you preach a message of oppression and racism to young people who've don't see color, when they don't see color as a young age, they're not going to see it later until somebody says, here's a state that's oppressive. Here's a people that are oppressive. Here's job creators who are oppressive. All of a sudden, a young person is saying, well, maybe I should feel oppressed as well. I believe in the nuclear family, and I believe that we in this body have to fight to protect it. It appears to me, and if you read the Black Lives Matter website, that they are all about destroying and dismantling the nuclear family, when we know that, in fact, the nuclear family is, in fact, what produces the healthiest, most well-adapted, successful children. And for some reason, there's something wrong with that. So transforming Minnesota is going to harm and is going to hurt our great state. So I think all of you, unfortunately, cannot be here, but all of you need to fight every day for our values, where we value the traditional institutions that have made our state and our country great. So I'm going to wrap it up. Don't forget the taxpayer. I also want to give a shout out to several groups. What are we hearing? Oh, I see. I'm sorry. First, the Reopen Minnesota Coalition. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's a growing group of small businesses who've made the bold decision that in spite of an executive shutdown order of bars and restaurants, they are going to open back up starting Wednesday. Very courageous, and I wish them all the best. And I hope we will all make a point to patronize them. Secondly, I want to give a shout out to the thousands of parents who've joined up with various Let Them Play or Let Them Be groups, which is aimed at really getting kids back in school. Thanks to those parents, because really grassroots is where the change is going to happen. But we can't allow this to continue to go on to hurt our kids, our families, and our communities. So best wishes to them. They have a lawsuit that they just filed against the governor and against the attorney general. So as Representative Layman said, it's kind of hard to leave, but this is also perhaps a really good time. It's hard to stay. No, what am I saying? It's hard to leave, but it's a hard time to stay. There's a lot that you are going to be dealing with. And I feel we've got a tremendous body here, a wonderful, I think my colleagues, especially in the Republican caucus, are as strong as we've ever been. We've been together for sometimes, well, some of us 4, 6, or 8 years. So it's grown to be a very strong caucus, and we haven't lost, well, we did lose quite a few, didn't we? But 4 years is a long time to be together, and now you'll have 6 years altogether. So best wishes, and please fight for truth, justice, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Lesch.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, you could probably tell, those of you who have me on video can tell you I wasn't planning on giving a retirement speech today. The great thing about having seniority is you go last, and so I get to rebut everything everyone said in front of me, especially Ray Dehn. So I'm going to do that. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that. Ray Dehn, you gave a great speech. Thank you. But a retirement speech is often used to thank staff and colleagues and constituents and to retell stories and career highlights. But here, after 18 regular legislative sessions, I think a good use of my time is to speak to you, all of my colleagues, about what I've learned and what you've taught me and what this place has taught me. And now I can't do this without recognizing the stellar contributions of the front desk and House nonpartisan staff. Over the years I've served here, you really are the best of the best. And watching you operate over the years in an impartial, professional and dedicated way has taught me a new meaning of professionalism. And I thank my LAs, my CAs, media people, and caucus researchers and dedicated CS writers who've toiled long and thanklessly to see the people's will realized and the good of the state secured, which are usually the same thing. In 18 years, I've seen a lot of retirement speeches. And one of the first ones I remember was from Doug Stang. You all know Doug Stang, and people remember Doug Stang when he was a member here as well, too. He's a Republican from the St. Cloud area. He was young at the time. In fact, he was younger than me, who was 31 while I was sitting there at the end of my first term, and he was retiring at the end of his fourth term. And he was 30 years old. And I never got to know Doug well, but I remembered his retirement speech because it was one of the first speeches I had ever heard. And as he told this chamber that he did not want another Sunday night when he tucked his kids in for the night and said goodbye to them, knowing that he would not see them again until the following weekend. As he told us that, he broke down and cried. And I can still see that scene in my mind's eye, a grown man crying on stage in public, telling the world how much he missed his family. And I will never forget my inability to really understand that at the time. At that time, as a newly elected young legislator, I was still very impressed with myself for winning a seat in the Minnesota House in my 20s. And I thought, when I looked at Doug Stang, I thought, but you're a state legislator. Surely your family understands and is proud of you with all the important things you're doing for your community. That makes up for all the absences, doesn't it? That's what I thought. Back then, I was young and motivated, and I was ready to take on the system and change the world. And when you're new in this body, you have an air of potential about you. And I know it does not seem that way to those of you who've gotten to know me in the last 15 years, but back when I was new, I had that too. And now I've never had it as much. I never had that optimism as much as the Pathfinders that I served with, because that's what you have when you're new and you're young. Those Pathfinders who I worked with, like Senator Mimua, elected in a special session less than a year before I was, she was the first Hmong legislator in America. She was bright, talented, a hard worker, and filled with promise. But then I saw what she had to contend with. She was not only a senator for 75,000 East Siders, but for every Hmong person in America and internationally for that matter, and for every liberal in Minnesota who steered into her orbit to bask in her glow. I never asked her about that directly, but I went to her office at the Capitol often. We were friends and contemporaries, and I saw her workload. And I felt like I had a lot to do as a new legislator, but it was absolutely nothing compared to what Mimua had to deal with. And I've seen that with other charismatic firsters who've come through this body as well. And I knew that that was not what I wanted. I did not want that much attention or adulation or demands or potential. And I found that to sand the edges off that possibility, it helped to become a little bit of a grouch, because people didn't ask you for things when you were a little bit of a grouch. So I did that a little bit. My first election night in 2002 was one of the most anticlimactic nights of my life, because I had been working on something, getting to the legislature so hard for 5 years, and I was still in my 20s. And then I stood there when the numbers came back in, and all I could think of was, now what? Back then when I was young, I always sought new things to work on, but I was not as attentive to what I had right in front of me, which was my family. And accordingly, I ended up divorced after my first term. But I thought to myself, hey, I got myself elected to the state legislature, right? There was that foolish consolation. And then those of you who know, I enlisted in the military in 2009. And in my time in the military, I chose the infantry, which in the Army is the pipeline for leadership. And so I've been very close to many who very apparently had their eye on getting that star, being a general someday. And that's not why I chose it. I chose it hoping for some of those hazardous experiences that are the fruit of learning in life. But I was exposed to so many stories about men who were 3-star generals who were on their third marriage one star for every wife, apparently, with adult children who wouldn't talk to him. All sacrifices to the God of ambition. And that's when ambition started appealing less to me 10, 11 years ago. And yet this place is driven by ambition, not by everyone, but by the issues that are noticed. And so it's been 15 years since I noticed that this job was taking more from me than perhaps I wanted and would have preferred to devote to my family. And I think about that line from The Natural where Roy Hobbs, played by Robert Redford, he's laying on a hospital gurney and he says to Iris Gaines, played by Glenn Close, "Doc says I have to quit baseball." And she says, "Why?" And he says, "Some mistakes, I guess, we just never stop paying for." I know many of you can walk and chew gum at the same time just fine. But I do want to say that I do not regret that my 4-year-old and 1-year-old girls, Eleanor and Isla, will not have to, in their formative years, compete with the Minnesota House and the people of Minnesota for my attention as a father. And I'm very lucky, I feel very lucky that my daughter Alice and I, she's 20 years old, she and I get along excellent, and I'm so very proud of her. And I feel like I dodged a bullet with her. In 2008, I met Melissa Reed, and I think it quickly became apparent of my affinity for Melissa because that session, Speaker Hortman was carrying one of her bills. She was a lobbyist for Minneapolis at the time. And I asked a question of Melissa Hortman about the bill she had just presented in caucus at the time, back when we caucused in those awkward committee rooms up in the East Wing before renovation. And she said to me in front of the caucus, "You should really ask Melissa Reed about that." And everyone in caucus laughed. And I thought, geez, is it that obvious? And Melissa and I have been married for 8 years now. And I'm very proud of that. When I got divorced from Tina after my first term, 15, 16 years ago, I was absolutely positively never going to get married again. And it wasn't just because I was depressed and dejected over that failure. I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone in this chamber that I'm a difficult person to live with. It's not lost on me either because it's difficult for me to live with me. But Melissa has the patience of Job. And when I met her, it was only my intention to date her. I wasn't going to get married. Nothing serious, nothing long-term. And it had nothing to do with her as a person. It had everything to do with my unwillingness to take on another risk at that level that put me in a bad place before. And during those years of not being in a good place, people may remember that in early 2006 was when I took a vacation trip to Baghdad and walked around getting to know the locals. It was at the height of the war. And in 2009, I enlisted in the military and chose to branch infantry, where I fully hoped and expected to see combat. There was no epiphany of grace which pulled me from my condition at that time. There was only the consistent and patient, enduring Melissa. And I repeatedly and consistently gave her the reasons to not stick around, fully expecting that she wouldn't, and that I would be free of any other further obligation to potentially commit to long term. But she's stubborn. She's really stubborn, and she never gave up. And after a couple of years, I started to question whether I should be so stubborn, and we got married in 2012. We have a daughter, Eleanor Iris, and in 2019, we had another daughter, Eleanor Isla Grace. And as the years wore on, I started looking more and more at my family, and I recall those resignation announcements that I used to chuckle at, where politicians were leaving office because they wanted to spend more time with their family. And I don't chuckle at them anymore. And I think about, I'm doing important things up here, and I am. I'm helping the people of Minnesota to my district. But nothing seems as important as my family does. And I feel incredibly grateful to finally get that, to finally get what Doug Stang was talking about in his House floor retirement speech all those years ago. When he was 30, that took me until middle age to get that. And I'm sorry to my ex-wife, Tina, and my oldest daughter, Alice. I was too young and stupid to realize that truth in my 20s, but they're both doing well. And they don't hate me, and I have excellent relationships with them, for which I'm grateful. But I'm really grateful to Melissa for saving me from that flavorless descent into self-congratulatory public life, the one where you convince yourself of the righteousness of your mission and surround yourself with enough sycophants who agree with you so that you never have to worry about whether you've lost your way. And I still love public service. My life has been filled with it. I first sought to serve the church with 3 years with the Redemptorist Order, that I was going to become a priest. I then sought to serve as a public attorney for 15 years with the St. Paul City Attorney's Office. And that overlapped with my 18 years as a state legislator for this community. And the 8 years I served with U.S. Army Infantry commanding soldiers in 2 of the 135, one of the most storied and decorated units in the history of the Republic. That is not an exaggeration. And who still command respect among active duty and reserve component units wherever they go. And there will be a chance to serve again. After all, I'm retiring after 18 years, and I'm still 10 years younger than the average age of this body, and service is in my blood, and that won't change. So if the opportunity presents itself someday, I'll be happy to return and disappoint a few of you expectant shares by stepping near the front of the gavel line, maybe. But for now, much like Roy Hobbs, I've been given another chance. Melissa gave me that chance. My daughter, Alice, is 20, Eleanor is 4, and Isla is 1. And I'm looking forward to summer weekends at the cabin with them and reading the newspaper on Sunday mornings like a normal person, and going out with my wife for cheeseburgers and beer at Shamrocks down on West 7th while the rest of you are screaming at each other in conference committee without enough sleep and fueled only by caffeine and hot dogs from the snack bar. And I won't likely miss that either. I'm grateful to my campaign volunteers, my enduring supporters, to the people of 66B who've entrusted me with their voice for these past 20 years. I've done my best. I left no stone unturned. And as I promised you 18 years ago as a young man, I came up here to make policy, not make friends. But I made a few friends despite myself. Thank you all.